Hey, Liberty North AP Psych. Good afternoon. This is live stream number 2 on Thursday, April 23rd. All right, so if you want to go ahead and get out your psych disorder chart that we started. Again, I think we're on a journey to 15 total disorders, I think. It might be a little more than that. But we did 1 through 3 yesterday. And today we're going to do 4 and 5. And just about every day, this will kind of generally be our pace. We cover 2 disorders. That seems to be the pretty good amount to do in live stream. 3 is kind of pushing it, but the 3 yesterday related to each other, so we kind of did that. But today we're going to add 4 and 5. Okay. All right. At 4 and 5 today. OCD and PTSD, and we'll go over it. And again, once I cover the information, I'll do a close-up of the kind of row so that you can complete it. Also, again, I've loaded some really good videos on Canvas. So ideally in class, what we would do is we would go over the information, watch the video, and then we discuss. If you have any questions from the videos, please send those to me. But I've got some great videos on the one on PTSD is probably one of the best all year. It's just really amazing. I'll kind of go into that here in a minute. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, remember that your learning targets are going to be covered by your chart as well. At least 6 through 9 will be. So today we're covering number 8 and number 7 parts of it. Okay. All right. Pull this a bit closer. Okay. All right. So what we have is number 4 is OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay. Now its category is obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Okay, I'll give you a close-up of that. Okay, obsessive compulsive and related disorders. This is covered in learning target number 8. Okay. And before we go any further, just let me kind of clarify here. So before the DSM-5, both of these disorders, OCD and PTSD, were in the category of anxiety disorders, which is why they show that way in your book. Okay, so now what has happened is, since the 4 and in between the 4 and the 5, we've gained a lot more knowledge about OCD and PTSD, and we also learned that there are more disorders that are similar to these. So this little subtopic has kind of grown to where it's become its own category now in the DSM-5. So yes, heavily influenced by anxiety, but they're kind of considered a different group of disorders now because the anxiety's focus comes to the obsessive compulsive type of thinking and behaviors. Obsessive thinking is definitely found up here in these other anxiety disorders and the other disorders that are in the anxiety disorder category. So it's a big part of anxiety, but just a little bit different. These are a little bit different types of disorders. If you've watched the show Hoarding, hoarding is the disorder that's in there. So it's kind of its own category now. So it's been removed from anxiety disorders and placed as its own category with a different name, obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Okay. So with both of these, you're going to see then one of the main symptoms is still panic attack. Okay, so they still have that root cause there. All right, and we'll kind of talk where the panic attacks fit. Okay, and then the main symptoms, which are in the name of the disorder, are obsessions and compulsions. Okay, so let's spend some time differentiating between the two. Obsessions are unwanted, intrusive, involuntary, automatic thoughts. Okay, so of which we all get. The difference is that you and I are able to kind of shrug those thoughts off, not give them any attention. They don't really carry any weight or spark any emotional response to us necessarily. We're able to just kind of get rid of them. We can't stop them from coming in, but we can just not pay attention to them, or they don't really spark anything within us. An obsession is a repetitive, so it's an unwanted thought that just doesn't stop, and it keeps intruding its way into your mind. Because again, you can't stop the thoughts automatically. You've got to kind of deal with them as they come. But these are really loaded, unwanted thoughts. They're repetitive. The individuals feel trapped by their thoughts, like they can't get away from them. So again, I think if you ever had a song stuck in your head, you know that it automatically just keeps coming in and you're struggling to get rid of it, even if you don't want it. Okay, multiply that times 100, you might have kind of a glimpse of what an obsessive thought is. They are generally not very pleasant. They can also be images, so they don't just have to be thought. Beliefs or stuff, but they could be just images that they get. But they are generally very dark, negative, scary, and involve persecution, and things like that. Okay. So at the root is when I start having my obsessions, I can go into a panic attack. So if I feel like my obsessions are taking over, if it's a really bad day, I feel like I can't get away, I feel trapped by my thoughts, again, they are very dark and scary, I can start to panic, okay, and have a panic attack. Now, a coping method that is naturally developed in OCD is the compulsions part, okay? So compulsions, C for coping, okay? So these basically the purpose of coping with the obsessions. If I am compulsing, which is a ritualistic action behavior, then I am not obsessing as much and my obsessions don't have that much weight. So I'm kind of distracting myself from the obsessions. Now, my obsessions and my compulsions can relate. So I think the number one obsession is, with germs, disease, dirtiness, those type of thoughts. So germaphobe, so on and so forth. And compulsions would then be washing, cleanliness, organization, stuff like that. Now, the second biggest is, I think, religious in nature, where people just continually have thoughts or images about the future, about death, about the apocalypse, end times, that type of thing. And then counting is actually the biggest one, I believe, is counting. Because if you think about it, counting I don't need anything else to count. I just need myself and my mind, and I can count in my head. So, if I have to wash my hands or use hand sanitizer, I got to have that with me, right? So it's easier to be able to develop a compulsion, which I don't need anything and I can do it anywhere, at any time, at any moment. Because OCD patients are compulsing a lot, okay? Because they're obsessing a lot. That's just kind of the root of this type of disorder, okay? All right, so I think the video that I posted on Canvas is the one on Howie Mandel, which a lot of you would know him, will be able to recognize him from Deal or No Deal. Thank you, Peyton, again. And then America's Got Talent. Okay, he was a comedian, but he has spent his whole life dealing with OCD. He is currently undergoing therapy still and medication. But what he does a really good job of is kind of showing you, again, that qualification for disordered or abnormal behavior, how much it has impacted his life. He actually had backyard, his own house, mini house, if you will, to when his OCD is really, really rough. He cannot be around his wife and kids. He has to go to this house. It's only for dad. Only dad can live in it. They can't go to him when he's there. It just kind of talks about really how it's invaded his life, which he's very honest and open and transparent about. Okay. All right. These are biological. Okay. So the cause of these intrusive thoughts is biological. There's new studies, probably about since 2014, that kind of identified the area. It's in our frontal lobe, deep within the recesses of the brain, a little structure here. And our two main biological treatments that are successful are SSRIs. So anything that deals with serotonin and increasing serotonin, there's definitely a correlation between OCD and serotonin in the brain, which are anti-anxiety, antidepressants. And then also there's a new deep brain stimulation in which they put a pacemaker in your brain and they attach it to the area that deals with OCD, mainly the obsessions. Because if I get rid of the obsessions, the compulsions generally go away because they don't serve any purpose. And by giving a continuous stimulation or shock to that area, it relieves the obsessions, which is awesome. Okay. This disorder is neurotic. Okay. Because it deals with anxiety at the core. Okay. So let's go back, show you the close up so you can make sure you've got it. There we go. Okay. So obsessive compulsive disorder. The category is obsessive compulsive and related disorders, learning target number 8. Okay, the symptoms are obviously panic attacks, okay? And then obsessions, compulsions, make sure you know the difference. It is biological, okay? It has a brain structure at the center of it, a lack of neurotransmitter serotonin, and it is neurotic, okay? Also, with the panic attacks, you can see those if the patients get into a situation where their obsessions are strong and they can't compulse, that will lead to a panic attack as well. You know, I had, when I taught at Park Hill South, I had probably, again, every year, I mean, it's pretty common that I will have students that are diagnosed OCD and are actively being treated for it. I had one last year, and you can definitely see it. But probably the biggest case that I've ever seen was in Park Hill South, where I had a young lady as a student who had a very, very intense, bad case of OCD, however you want to say it. And her obsessions, her repetitive thoughts were about religion. So she kind of fit that qualification there. So she was always thinking about in the future, what's going to happen to her, what happens to her when she dies, what's going to happen to the world, to her family. And she would have these thoughts, and she'd also have these images of death and stuff like that. So they were very dark, disturbing, scary thoughts, obviously thoughts that nobody would want to have. And she definitely couldn't stand them, but they just would keep invading her brain over and over. And you could see it in class when she was having a really rough day, that she was just battling her mind, and she couldn't get it to stop. She was obviously in therapy, on medication, and her compulsions were counting. So she would count. And usually OCD patients create a unique way to count. They usually have a favorite number. Usually the number is odd. However, I remember her number was 16, which I think that's the only time I've ever heard of that. It's an even number. It's just very unique. But if you can, I think I might have shared this, but if you can picture like every number and word that she saw, she would picture it in your alarm clock, numerical things like they have the little dashes in them. So the little dashes to make up the numbers. And she would count those dashes in every number and every word that she saw. So at school, obviously, her mind was just going. It was like mental gymnastics, because every time she read something or she did math, she would have to count those little hashes in the number. And then she would have to stop. She'd always count till she got to the number 16. If she couldn't get to the number 16 by just straight counting, then she performed some mathematical operation to get to the number 16. And then she could stop and take a break. So, school was very taxing for her. It was very difficult for her to read, to get through math problems, in a quick and timely manner. It was just rough, and you could see it. But that's kind of a great example of it. So at the core of it were the obsessions. She just could not and did not like those thoughts, and they were not pleasant, but they were automatically intrusive, invading her mind, and she just created a way to cope with it. While she's counting, she's not obsessing, right? That's the whole purpose of the compulsions, okay? And when she can't count, it obviously makes the obsessions louder, panic attack, okay? And there were a couple times in class she would have to leave because she would have a panic attack. The thoughts would just kind of take over, and we're too strong for the medicine, therapy, or the compulsions. OCD patients have really rough days, and it's just mentally draining, something that most of us can't relate to, okay? All right, so that's OCD. Great video over Howie Mandel, so make sure you watch that. Okay, number 5 is PTSD. I'll get you the name of that category here. Okay, so PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was an anxiety disorder as well, and the DSM-5 has been moved out to its own category called trauma and stress-related disorders. Okay, trauma and stress-related disorders, and this is learning target number 7. Okay, so I think this is the one you can definitely knew that in the DSM-5 they're going to pull it out of anxiety disorders. It does have anxiety at the core of it, but you can kind of see that it just didn't fit there. And then of course between the 4 and the 5 revision, we've also learned that there are many other trauma and stress-related disorders, and PTSD is probably the one that gets the most notoriety, is talked about in movies and TV shows. But you just kind of knew it just didn't really fit cleanly into anxiety disorders. Okay. All right. Symptoms, panic attacks, again. So they are a huge part of PTSD. We'll talk about that, where that comes from. And then flashbacks. Okay. Flashbacks. And the flashbacks are not dreams. They're actually So what has happened is an individual has encountered an experience that is just horrific. They cannot cope with what they've experienced, what they've seen, what they've heard. They can't handle or cope with the situation. So this is the mind's way. Again, this disorder gives you a distinct perspective into the power of our minds and what they will do to protect us. Okay, so you are overwhelmed. You cannot cope with the horrifying thing that you've experienced. So your brain's going to hide it, and it's going to actually help you deal with it in bits and pieces. So it's kind of like a giant coping method. So sometimes with PTSD, they don't remember the event because it's so horrifying. The mind just kind of blocks it. And then it starts to come out in bits and pieces, in flashbacks, in which you relive the horrifying event over and over and over. Things in the environment, stimulus, will remind you of the event, and you'll live it over and over and over. Okay, the flashbacks can happen during the day, awake, and also at night, but they are not dreams. They basically, in a flashback, they are psychotic. Okay, they have split from reality. They have the present, and they have gone back to the event, and they're reliving it as if they were there. Okay, so a big, big difference. And your brain, it looks different than a dream does as well. Okay, so this is environmental because you have to have the traumatic event. All right, that's kind of the catalyst. And the traumatic event could be anything that the individual cannot cope with. That's overwhelming. It's horrific. So, there's a lot about PTSD with our soldiers and veterans, and absolutely so, because they encounter, to protect our country and our nation, they encounter horrific scenes, experiences, things that I'm sure they wish they could forget or never experienced in the first place. So it definitely has a place there and has existed ever since war has existed. But any experience could be horrifying or traumatic to somebody. So, it doesn't have to be war. It can be medical trauma. I think today is the number one diagnosed PTSD. In other words, people have had a horrific experience with a medical event, life-threatening trauma, and as a result, they develop PTSD. The student who is going to come in and share, again, one thing I always do is I have past students who are diagnosed with these disorders receiving treatment come in and share, and she is a PTSD. She's a nurse student now, but she has come in the last 2 years, and she's talked about PTSD, and she was diagnosed because of a medical trauma. So there was, several months in there that she had massive physical symptoms. Very serious physical symptoms. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with her. Several times during that she thought she was dying, rushed to the hospital, all that kind of stuff. And then later on, they did diagnose her with a rare form of nerve pain. But every time during her anniversary date, they usually have an anniversary date, she starts to get anxious, and will have flashbacks, and she'll have them during the day, at night, anything that, any sound that reminds her, any smell, any picture, any sensory stimuli that reminds her of the event will just slip her into a flashback. She's still being treated. She's still in therapy for it. So this would be the 4th year, I think. Also when we were being trained and by clinicians, they were treating a man who was in a violent car crash. He was driving down the highway. A young teenage girl pulled out in front of him, so it was not his fault, and he nailed her. And he swore, just in that instant, he thought that he had killed her. Both ended up being fine, huge blessing. But after the event was over, he relived the car crash during flashbacks, day and night. If he was outside, he heard squealing tires. If he heard a rev of an engine, if he smelled gas or oil or burning, he would immediately slip into these panic attacks. So if he heard or saw anything that reminded him or that he experienced during the actual accident, he would relive it. It would kind of just snap him back in, and he would relive it. And at that moment, he would cease to be here in the present, and he would be someplace else, which is why this one is psychotic. Okay. All right. So I've got that underlined because this is the first psychotic disorder. Right. And again, and it's not what most of you think. Again, psychotic is a loaded term. We throw it around loosely in culture all the time without using it appropriately or correctly. Okay. But basically what happens is when they have their flashbacks, they are not here anymore. They are back during the trauma, dealing with the trauma, experiencing it again, reliving what happened to them. Okay. Which is why then they are not here or based in reality. They are someplace else. Okay. So trauma and stress related disorders, learning target number 7. panic attacks, flashbacks, environmental causes, and psychotic. Okay. Now, again, I want to encourage you to go back to Canvas and watch the videos that I post because they are very intriguing. But the one on PTSD is probably one of the best videos I show all year long. It's based out of Kansas City. So a veteran of the Iraq War basically was on Extreme Home Makeover. So if you remember that show, they actually built him a house in Ottawa, Kansas, which is south of here. So he was actually on the show. And a lot of clinicians, and I think even his psychiatrist said, this is probably the worst case of PTSD that most people have ever experienced or seen. And you actually then in the video, it's unique because of that, but also because he has a service dog. So again, we have a warrior's friend right across from Liberty North in which they train service dogs. And one of the groups that they train them for are PTSD veterans. And this dog, basically, whenever he breaks from reality during his flashbacks, this dog can sense it and knows it and will jump on him and bring him back into reality. So it keeps him from leaving reality, which is absolutely amazing. And the dog can also sense when he's getting ready to have a panic attack, and it'll just comfort him. It'll snuggle up next to him and let him know that he's okay. He has something here to ground him. Okay. And also during the video, you'll actually see him break. He'll actually be outside and you'll hear a tornado siren, and he's gone. He's back in Iraq. When they're driving, if he goes under a bridge, he goes right back there because that's where they used to be attacked, is when they went under our bridges. So it's really a fascinating video, and it's real heartwarming because you got the service dog, but you can also see how intrusive it has been in his life, how hard it is for him to function, based on just him reliving the past and coping with it. Okay, so make sure you check that video out. I think that's what we've got so far on this one. So just 2 disorders today. There was something else about PTSD I was going to say, but I can't remember what it is. Okay, so 4 is OCD, 5 is PTSD. All right, so anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive and related disorders, and trauma, stress related disorders. Okay, all right. And that's generally kind of the pace we'll go. Each day we'll kind of I'll try to pick 2 disorders probably from the same category. Give you 2 examples. A lot of them are what college classes emphasize or what AP emphasizes, or a combination. And then we'll go through those and try to do 2 a day. I think we're going to get to 15. It might be actually a little bit more than that. But I think it'll be between 15 and 20 is what we'll have. Okay. So again, you'll turn this in. This is your lab. So we're going to work through that together for the last chapter. And then just make sure you watch the videos. The other video I have on there is actually After Earth, which I think was a 2014 movie with Will Smith and his son. It's not a bad movie. It's really short. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes or something. It's very quick. But he has a very famous quote in there, and I believe it's Will Smith and Denzel Washington, which are like the #1 requested graduation speakers, motivational speakers who are celebrities, in which he says fear is not real. Fear is just a choice, because it's based on thoughts about the future, about things that may not even happen. And that really kind of opened the eyes to some people in the psychology community. Some people liked it, some people didn't. But there's actually, if you go and look at that clip, there's all kinds of YouTube videos about that clip, and it's used in presentations and so on and so forth. So, but I wanted you to, because he gives his little explanation there in that little 4-minute clip that I give you, and see what you think. If you think fear is just simply a product of our mind and of our thoughts, which is what he says. It's basically just triggered by your thoughts. And most of the time it's based on something that might not even happen, and it's not even real. And he says, danger is real, okay, but fear is not. He makes the difference between the two, which is kind of fascinating. So anyway, check that out, see what you think, okay? All right, any questions? Are we good to go? Okay, remember, tomorrow is Friday, so no live stream on Friday. So Friday's a work day, work on Psych, work on another class, or just take a break, okay? I could really get into these 4-day school weeks. I think we should join Lathrop School District and do 4-day weeks. That'd be great. And maybe that'll be a change after we get out of COVID-19. And then also there will be a change in the schedule next week. So just so those of you who watch in the afternoons, the AP Psych live stream is only going to be in the morning. And then on the afternoon live streams, I'm going to be doing AP test prep for the AP testers. So we'll be doing that in the afternoon. So basically, I know I have many more students, 30-ish, that watch the live stream. So that's why I decided to keep that time. So again, if you can't make it, just watch the video as the live stream are posted. Okay. But I'll send out a tweet about that this weekend. Okay. So no live streams tomorrow, and we'll see everybody on Monday.